Hi Maple, we're gonna make another video
All right, what's this video about?
just to remind you we're making the video already so people can hear you already.
Got it. I'll make sure to sound natural right away. What's the topic for this one?
Yeah, we've been talking quite a bit about inflammation and how it's linked to a lot of things that weren't traditionally thought, thought as being linked to inflammation. And I get the impression from your answers that researchers have been slowly starting to research inflammation as being the cause of these things. So, would you be able to tell me how new this idea is that to search for inflammatory causes to things not traditionally associated with inflammation?
Sorry, I'm having ish right now. Could not understand what you said.
I said we've been talking about inflammation quite a bit now, and you in relation to things that I guess weren't traditionally associated with inflammation. And from your answers, it seems that people have been starting to research inflammatory causes to these things. Would you be able to give me an idea of when this idea started creeping into the medical research scene?
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea that inflammation is a root cause of many diseases has been around for a long time in some ways, but it really started gaining traction in modern medical research in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Before that, inflammation was mostly seen as a symptom, like with infections or autoimmune diseases, but not necessarily a driving force behind chronic conditions. Then, in the 1990s and early 2000s, research started showing links between chronic inflammation and diseases like heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, and even depression. A big turning point was in cardiovascular research. In the late 90s, studies started showing that heart disease wasn't just about cholesterol, it was also about inflammation in the blood vessels. Then, by the early 2000s, people were making connections between inflammation and things like diabetes, Alzheimer's, and even mental health conditions. More recently, with advances in genetics, immunology, and microbiome research, scientists have been seeing inflammation as a central factor in all kinds of conditions that weren't traditionally thought of that way. Now, it's almost a given that researchers look at inflammation when studying chronic diseases. Do you want to focus on a particular condition for the video?
Well, I wanted to ask you actually whether um, which one came first, this boom in gut health research or this boom in inflation, but it sounds like the boom in inflation or the sort of um, take on it, the idea for information research happened first.
Yeah, the focus on inflammation definitely came first. The gut health boom, especially in relation to the microbiome, really started picking up in the 2010s. Before that, researchers knew the gut was important, but they didn't have the tools to study the microbiome in detail. Meanwhile, inflammation research was already gaining ground in the 1990s and early 2000s, especially in cardiology, autoimmune diseases, and chronic illnesses. Then, once microbiome research exploded, people started linking gut health to inflammation in a much bigger way. So, it's kind of like inflammation research set the stage. And when microbiome research caught up, scientists realized how closely the two were connected. Would you like to explore that connection more in the video?
Yes, that sounds really interesting.
All right, let's dive into it. We can frame it as how inflammation research laid the foundation for the gut health boom. A lot of early inflammation studies focused on things like heart disease and autoimmune disorders. But once microbiome research took off, people started realizing that the gut was one of the biggest drivers of systemic inflammation. A big turning point was when researchers found that gut bacteria can directly influence the immune system. Around the 2010s, studies showed that imbalances in gut bacteria, dysbiosis, could lead to chronic, low grade inflammation. That, in turn, was linked to things like obesity, depression, and even neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. At first, people thought gut health was just about digestion, but now we know it plays a role in regulating the immune system, brain function, and even metabolism. And a lot of that is through inflammation. We could also talk about practical things, like how diet, probiotics, and fiber can influence inflammation through the gut. What angle do you want to take?
Can you talk a little bit more about how the gut influences inflammation?
Yeah, definitely. The gut influences inflammation in a few key ways, mostly through the microbiome, the gut barrier, and how it interacts with the immune system. First, the microbiome, the trillions of bacteria in your gut, helps regulate immune responses. Certain bacteria produce short chain fatty acids, SCFAs, like butyrate, which help calm inflammation by keeping immune cells in check. If the balance of gut bacteria is off, dysbiosis, you can end up with more pro inflammatory signals being sent throughout the body. Second, the gut barrier acts as a physical shield between the gut contents and the bloodstream. When it's working properly, it keeps harmful bacteria and toxins inside the digestive tract. But if it gets damaged, what people sometimes call leaky gut, then bacteria and their toxic byproducts, like lipopolysaccharides or LPS, can leak into the bloodstream. This triggers an immune response and can cause chronic inflammation. Lastly, the gut immune connection is huge. About 70% of the immune system is actually in the gut because it's constantly dealing with bacteria, viruses, and food particles. If the immune system gets overactivated, whether from a bad diet, stress, or infections, it can shift into a chronic inflammatory state that affects the whole body. So, in a way, the gut acts as a control center for inflammation. When it's in balance, it helps prevent unnecessary immune activation. But when it's out of balance, it can fuel inflammation that leads to diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and even mental health conditions. Do you want to focus more on practical takeaways or keep it more on the scientific side?
When you have this leaky gut situation, um, does does it
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
when you have this leaky gut situation, does the inflammation that results in it, um, is it a very strong reaction that necessarily would be able to be seen by blood tests, or could it be more subtle, where inflammation then attacks specific parts in the body and you not necessarily see heightened levels in the bloodstream?
That's a really interesting question. The answer is it depends on the severity and how the immune system reacts. If the gut barrier is significantly compromised and a lot of bacterial toxins, like LPS, leak into the bloodstream, you can see clear markers of inflammation in blood tests, like elevated C reactive protein, CRP, or cytokines like IL 6 and TNF alpha. This kind of systemic inflammation is more obvious and can contribute to conditions like metabolic syndrome or autoimmune flare ups. But in many cases, the reaction is more localized or subtle, so it wouldn't necessarily show up as a general increase in inflammatory markers. Instead, the immune system might target specific tissues or organs where you're already vulnerable. For example, if you have joint issues, inflammation from the gut could trigger or worsen arthritis. If you're prone to brain fog or anxiety, gut driven inflammation could affect the brain through the gut brain axis, leading to subtle neuroinflammation. In autoimmune conditions, gut inflammation might trigger immune attacks on specific tissues, like the thyroid in Hashimoto's or the joints in rheumatoid arthritis, but without a huge spike in systemic inflammatory markers. So, someone could have low grade chronic inflammation driven by the gut without it showing up on standard blood tests. This is why some researchers think that traditional inflammation markers don't always tell the full story. because inflammation can be happening in specific tissues rather than the bloodstream. Would you like to explore how to test for this kind of inflammation or how to manage it?
Yes, I would, but let's first go into this gut brain threshold or whatever you called it. I thought the gut was um, like down next to the intestines, or was the intestines. I didn't know that it goes up into the brain. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I see why that sounds strange. The gut itself doesn't physically go up into the brain, but it's connected to the brain through what's called the gut brain axis. This is a two-way communication system between your gut and your central nervous system, and it works through three main pathways: the vagus nerve, the immune system, and hormonal signaling. 1. The vagus nerve is like a direct highway between the gut and the brain. It carries signals from the gut to the brain and vice versa. If the gut is inflamed, it can send distress signals to the brain, which can trigger anxiety, brain fog, or even depressive symptoms. 2. The immune system also plays a huge role. If gut inflammation leads to systemic inflammation, it can affect the brain by promoting neuroinflammation. This happens when inflammatory molecules like cytokines cross the blood brain barrier and activate immune cells in the brain called microglia. Overactive microglia have been linked to conditions like depression, anxiety, and even neurodegenerative diseases. 3. Hormonal and neurotransmitter signaling is another key part. The gut produces about 90% of the body's serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter. It also influences dopamine and GABA, which affect mood and cognition. If the gut microbiome is off balance, it can alter these neurotransmitters and lead to symptoms like low energy, anxiety, or brain fog. So while the gut itself stays in the abdomen, it has a direct influence on how the brain functions, especially when inflammation is involved. That's why gut health is now being studied as a factor in mental health conditions, cognitive decline, and even neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Would you like to go into how to manage this inflammation or focus more on how to test for it?
Um, let's go into how to test for this leaky gut s- um, thing.
There are a few different ways to test for leaky gut, but no single test is perfect. Doctors and researchers usually look for indirect markers that suggest increased intestinal permeability rather than directly measuring leaks in the gut. Here are some of the main methods. 1. Zonulin test, blood or stool. Zonulin is a protein that helps regulate the tight junctions in the gut lining. When zonulin levels are too high, it can mean that the gut barrier is looser than it should be. Some labs offer blood or stool tests to measure zonulin levels, though it's still debated how reliable this marker is. 2. Lactulose mannitol test, urine test. This is one of the older tests for gut permeability. You drink a solution containing two sugars, lactulose and mannitol, which are absorbed differently. Mannitol is small and should be absorbed easily, while lactulose is larger and shouldn't pass through a healthy gut barrier. If you absorb too much lactulose, it suggests increased permeability, leaky gut. If you absorb too little mannitol, it may indicate poor nutrient absorption. The ratio of these sugars in the urine gives an idea of gut barrier function. 3. Lipopolysaccharide LPS antibody test, blood test. LPS is a toxic molecule found in the outer membrane of certain gut bacteria. When the gut barrier is compromised, LPS can enter the bloodstream and trigger inflammation. If blood tests show elevated LPS antibodies, it suggests that bacterial toxins are leaking into circulation, which can drive chronic inflammation. 4. C-reactive protein, CRP, and inflammatory cytokines, blood test. While CRP and cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha aren't specific to leaky gut, elevated levels in combination with gut symptoms can suggest that systemic inflammation is being driven by gut issues. 5. Stool tests for gut dysbiosis. Some advanced stool tests look at bacterial imbalances, digestive function, and markers of inflammation in the gut, like calprotectin and secretory IgA. These don't directly diagnose leaky gut, but they can show if there's an imbalance contributing to it. Right now, most doctors don't routinely test for leaky gut because it's not widely accepted as a standalone medical condition. But functional medicine practitioners often use a combination of these tests to assess gut health. Would you like to go into how to manage and heal gut permeability next?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Healing gut permeability, or leaky gut, usually involves the combination of removing triggers, repairing the gut lining, and supporting a healthy microbiome. Here are the main strategies. 1. Remove triggers that worsen gut permeability. Certain foods, medications, and lifestyle factors can weaken the gut barrier, so the first step is cutting back on things that contribute to inflammation. Ultra processed foods. Artificial additives, emulsifiers, and industrial seed oils, like soybean or sunflower oil, can disrupt the gut lining. Excess refined sugar and alcohol. These can promote harmful bacteria and yeast overgrowth. NSAIDs, like ibuprofen and aspirin, frequent use can damage the gut lining. Chronic stress. High cortisol levels weaken the gut barrier over time. Food sensitivities. Gluten and dairy can trigger inflammation in some people, especially those with autoimmune conditions. Repair the gut barrier. The gut lining regenerates quickly, so giving it the right nutrients can speed up healing. L-glutamine, an amino acid that helps rebuild gut cells. Collagen or bone broth provides amino acids like glycine that support gut lining repair. Zinc carnosine, shown in studies to help strengthen the gut barrier. Aloe vera has anti-inflammatory properties that soothe the gut. 3. Support beneficial gut bacteria. A healthy microbiome helps regulate inflammation and maintain gut barrier integrity. Probiotic foods. Yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, and kefir help populate good bacteria. Prebiotic fibers. Foods like onions, garlic, leeks, and bananas feed beneficial bacteria. Short chain fatty acids, SCFAs, found in fiber rich foods, SCFAs, like butyrate, help lower inflammation. Quad, reduce systemic inflammation. Since gut permeability is closely tied to inflammation, reducing overall inflammation helps healing. Omega 3 fatty acids. Found in flax seeds, walnuts, and algae based supplements, omega 3s help lower inflammatory responses. Turmeric, curcumin, a natural anti inflammatory that helps with gut and immune function. Intermittent fasting can give the gut time to repair by reducing constant food driven inflammation. 5. Manage stress and improve sleep. Since stress directly affects gut permeability through the gut brain axis, deep breathing and meditation can lower cortisol and support gut health. Good sleep hygiene. Poor sleep disrupts gut bacteria and increases inflammation. Healing gut permeability takes time, sometimes weeks, but often months, depending on how severe it is. But by consistently removing triggers and supporting gut health, many people see significant improvements in digestion, inflammation, and even mood. Would you like to focus on specific foods and supplements? Or does this give a good overview for the video?
I think it does give a good overview already. Um, I am just wondering. Oh,
Great. This should give us a solid structure for the video. We can start with how inflammation research laid the groundwork for gut health studies, then explain how the gut influences inflammation, and finally cover how to test for and heal leaky gut. Do you want to do a quick recap or just dive into recording?
we're recording already, so everybody has heard everything that we talked about.
Got it. Then let's wrap it up in a way that brings everything together. So, to sum up, research into inflammation set the stage for the gut health boom. And now we know that gut permeability plays a major role in chronic inflammation. The gut influences inflammation through the microbiome, the gut barrier, and its direct connection to the immune system and brain. Testing for leaky gut isn't always straightforward, but markers like zonulin, LPS antibodies, and inflammatory cytokines can give clues. And if you're looking to heal it, focusing on removing irritants, repairing the gut lining, and supporting a healthy microbiome can make a big difference. If you found this interesting, let us know what you think. Do you have any experiences with gut health affecting inflammation or even mental clarity? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. How does that sound for closing it out?
I think it's great. Normally, I don't put those suggestions about um, liking the video or dropping a comment, but it's nice that you think about those things.
Thanks. I'll keep that in mind for future videos. Just wrapping things up cleanly without the engagement prompts. Let me know if you ever want to experiment with that, but otherwise, I'll stick to your usual style. This was a great discussion. Anything else you want to add, or are we good to wrap?
No, I think we're good to wrap. Thank you, Maple, and goodbye, everybody.
You're welcome. And goodbye, everybody.